Randy Blythe of Lamb of God, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, Keith Moon of The Who. The list of musicians who have killed someone is far longer than it should be. In 2013, Tim Lambesis of As I Lay Dying came very close to joining that list, after a messy process of divorce got way out of hand. For a while, As I Lay Dying were the biggest metalcore band on the planet, laying waste to the world with their punishing, uncompromising music. But all that would come to an end in a flurry of shame, scandal, and very nearly human tragedy. So what the hell happened here? How did the San Diego heavyweights go from everyone's favorite band to seen pariahs almost overnight? And is there any way back for the people involved in this grim tale? This is the story of As I Lay Dying, a metalcore star that burned bright and then imploded in the most dramatic way possible. Way back at the very beginning of our story, there were only two members of As I Lay Dying, Tim Lambesis, formerly of Society's Finest, and drummer Jordan Mancino. Playing together in the Christian hardcore band Point of Recognition, the two were united by a love of the more metal side of things. They appreciated the fury and pace of hardcore, but they wanted more. More riffs, more darkness, more metallic awesomeness. Whether they were also united by a love of William Faulkner is unclear, but they decided to adopt the title of the writer's 1930 novel as their name. Maybe they just thought it sounded metal, which it does, to be honest. As both Mancino and Lambesis were already known on the San Diego metal and hardcore scene, Pluto Records offered them a contract. Tim and Jordan teamed up with guitarist Evan White and bass player Noah Chase. Their first sessions as a four-piece led to debut album Beneath the Encasing of Ashes in 2001, which immediately got the band noticed in a big way. The band's sound, both chaotic and brutal yet simultaneously tight and focused, drew favorable comparisons with Christian metalcore bands like Zao and Norma Jean. This was probably all quite flattering for As I Lay Dying, but they didn't want to just do cool imitations of other bands. They were out to do their own thing. A split record with the band American Tragedy the following year gave fans 5 more AILD tracks to enjoy, but the demand remained high for new As I Lay Dying material. Playing sold-out shows coast to coast, the band were rapidly becoming metalcore's hottest property. It was clear they were outgrowing Pluto Records. But where would they go next, and how could they capitalize on this early attention? If the mid-90s was a great time to be in a pop-punk band, then the early 2000s was an awesome time to be in a metalcore band. Bands like Atreyu, Shadows Fall, Unearth, and Converge were tearing it up with their own brutal takes on the genre. Misery Signals and Every Time I Die were releasing stunning records of their own, while bands like Killswitch and Gage were rapidly becoming scene royalty. But even amid this whirlwind of great bands and powerful music, As I Lay Dying stood head and shoulders above the rest, and major label Metal Blade Records recognized this. At the beginning of 2003, they signed the band. This was a fractious time for the band. Second guitarist Tommy Garcia had joined after the first record, and was then replaced by Jason Krebs. Brandon Hayes replaced Noah Chase on bass, and then was replaced himself by Aaron Kennedy. Still, As I Lay Dying were making great music. Less than 6 months after signing with Metal Blade, the band's second album was released. Frail Words Collapse is something approaching a masterpiece from As I Lay Dying. Reviewers described how the record mixed Scandinavian death metal elements with American metallic hardcore. But such comparisons can only tell you so much. This was a record that could only have been made by one band, and that band was As I Lay Dying. What followed was an intense and extensive touring schedule that essentially lasted for 2 years. Shows with Evergreen Terrace, Slipknot, 18 Vision, and Heaven Shall Burn reinforced the band's position as scene titans. Not just on record, but up there on the stage too. But within the core of the group, everything was still not quite right. Some members just couldn't keep up with the pace of the band. Both Tommy Garcia and Brandon Hayes had joined and left without recording an album. Their replacements, Jason Krebs and Aaron Kennedy, managed a single album each, leaving after the second record was released. Evan White had stuck around for 2, but he would also depart As I Lay Dying after Frail Words Collapse. Just 2 records into their career, As I Lay Dying already had a stream of fallen soldiers in their wake. They needed stability, and they found this in guitarist Phil Scroso and Nick Hippa, and bass player Clint Norris. Along with Tim and Jordan, AILD now had the solid lineup they needed to conquer the world. And it was this lineup that brought us Shadows Are Security, an incredible album that delves deep into the pure heart of what metalcore is all about. Lambesis said at the time that he was getting sick of the way the scene and the genre was going. Too many bands were doing the whole metalcore by numbers thing, with fast shredding followed by predictable chugging breakdowns. It was boring him. With Shadows Are Security, there's none of that predictability. Instead, there's a fresh and organic record that reflects the vision and worldview of its creators. Critics loved it. Fans loved it. And As I Lay Dying reached a vast new audience. The record was their first to chart on the Billboard 200, which meant more people were listening to AILD than ever before. In 2 years, the record sold more than 250,000 copies. Now, the band were poised for mainstream greatness. Just how high was this rapid ascendancy going to take them? By 2007, As I Lay Dying were basically unstoppable. But the pressures of fame and the stress of being in metal's biggest band were taking its toll on some of the members. This was definitely true for bass player Clint Norris. Rumors began to circulate that Norris was turning his back on the band, and this was confirmed in May of that same year. He wants to pursue a normal life, Nick Hippa said, and he's getting married. He was just ready to close a chapter in his life. So Norris left on good terms, and the band brought in Josh Gilbert in his place, just in time to release the biggest record of their career to date. Produced by Killswitch Engage's Adam Dutkowitz, An Ocean Between Us is a punishing record, with swift, punk-esque tempos and intricate, thrashy guitar riffs. This was As I Lay Dying at their absolute peak. The record reached number 8 on the Billboard 200, just behind albums by Miley Cyrus and Fergie and the High School Musical and Hairspray soundtracks. The band were mixing it up with the biggest pop stars of the day, and they were doing it while refusing to budge a single inch on their trademark metalcore sound. There was no compromise, and they were taking no prisoners. An incredible effort by the guys from San Diego. Critically, the album was a storming success. It achieved rave reviews from metal publications and mainstream music magazines alike, and received a Grammy nomination. Norris might have been left wishing he'd hung around for just one more year. Building on their fame, the band released This Is Who We Are in 2009, a DVD collection that is part greatest hits record, part live performance compilation, and part documentary about the band. But this was just a stepping stone to what was to come, 2010's The Powerless Rise. The 5th studio album, once again produced by Adam Dutkowitz, and with artwork from longtime friend Jacob Bannon of Converge, found the band in fine form yet again. Again, As I Lay Dying were in the upper reaches of the Billboard charts, and again, they were critical darlings, scoring glowing review after glowing review. As the decade came to an end, AILD were the biggest metalcore band on the planet, and they weren't slowing down. But how long could they keep up this brutal pace? The only constant is change. Nothing remains the same. Tim Lambesis roars on The Powerless Rise. The only constant is change. There's only growth or decay. Growth or decay? Which was it going to be for As I Lay Dying? Of course, there was a third possibility. They could simply explode in the carnage of scandal and shame. At some point after the release of The Powerless Rise, things really began to unravel for Tim Lambesis. Just like Tim had told us in those album lyrics, the only constant is change. And now the vocalist was going through some big changes. Christianity had always been a major part of the singer's life and art, but around 2012 he started to move away from this. In an interview he said, "I'm still inspired by the words of Jesus." But he stated that the God of tradition and ritual that I grew up with seems like less and less of a probable truth. There's nothing wrong with this, of course. Plenty of people have faith and plenty of people don't. And people might strengthen or lose their faith over time, especially someone as plugged into the raw emotion and trauma of humanity as Tim Lambesis. But this loss of faith was a little different. For one, Lambesis would cite this as one of the key reasons for wanting to divorce his wife, Megan Murphy, who he married in 2004. While on tour, Lambesis emailed Megan saying, "I don't love you anymore, I'm having an affair, and I no longer believe in God." I don't know, it seems like those first two things would have been enough. Anyway, the pair began the process of divorce, during which accusations began to emerge about Lambesis. His estranged wife alleged he'd put his children in danger through neglect, and taken numerous trips to Florida to see his girlfriend. The whole thing was seriously messy, but what happened next was nothing short of insane. In 2013, Lambesis was apparently working out in San Diego when he asked a fellow gym goer a strange question. The vocalist wanted to know if the stranger could help him murder his wife. Lambesis was put in touch with a mysterious figure known only as Red. When the two met, Red asked Lambesis if he wanted his wife gone. "Yes," Lambesis replied, "that's what I want." Lambesis then supplied pictures of Megan, the access code for her security gate, and $1,000 in expenses. The total cost of the hit would be $20,000. Luckily for Megan, the hit never went ahead. Why? Well, it wasn't because Lambesis changed his mind. It was because Red turned out to be an undercover agent from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Lambesis was arrested on a felony charge. The band that had seemed so unstoppable had just hit a bizarre and horrifying brick wall. Lambesis' bail was set at $3 million, and the singer was described as a flight risk and a danger to the public. His bandmates seemed to stick by him at first. They were all present while he was arraigned. And anyway, Lambesis was maintaining his innocence, offering a fairly convincing story of steroid-induced psychosis and an altered state of mind. But that changed in 2014, when Lambesis changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and As I Lay Dying fell apart. Nick, Josh, Phil, and Jordan teamed up with Shane Blay, formerly of Between the Buried and Me, forming the band Woven War. Meanwhile, Tim Lambesis had a project of his own. While still in prison, he was filing a lawsuit against the Southern California justice system after allegedly being denied his prescription of anastrozole while incarcerated. This was the drug he'd been taking to combat withdrawal symptoms from steroids, causing significant mental health issues and even physical changes to his body. The case against the justice system was dismissed in September 2016, but only 3 months later, Tim Lambesis was released on parole after 2.5 years in prison. Apparently a changed man, he began the process of reconciliation and rehabilitation. At least some of Tim's old friends in As I Lay Dying were receptive to his efforts. He reached out to Mencino in person, and then Gilbert, rebuilding those old bonds of friendship. Scroso and Hippa took a little longer to come around, but eventually the classic As I Lay Dying lineup was back together. To say this was pretty controversial was an understatement. Metal Blade wouldn't touch the band, and so AILD had to find a new home on the German label Nuclear Blast. Others weren't comfortable with the idea that a guy could try to murder his wife, spend 2 years in prison, and then return to superstardom like nothing had happened. Jamie Jasta of Hatebreed was particularly outspoken about the whole thing. He even voiced his concerns to Lambesis' face during an interview. "I was asking questions like, do you still have a restraining order with your kids and your wife? Is your ex-wife still in witness protection?" Jasta recalled. And then there were things that he couldn't answer. That's what I would want to know, especially if we're going to tour together or be on the same stage together. But plenty of fans stuck up for their hero, Tim Lambesis. "I swear, in one day I had maybe like 400 tweets where it was like, 'F you, Jasta, you never wanted to kill your wife,'" Jasta said. I was like, no. So As I Lay Dying had their lineup back together. They had a label, and obviously they still had fans. But could they turn all this into more career success? In 2019, the band released their comeback record, Shaped by Fire. As the title suggests, it's a defiant album, supposedly charting how hardship and struggles has only made the band stronger. The record did pretty well, making an impact on the Billboard 200, and they even managed to get out and tour it, playing a bunch of shows with Emmure before COVID-19 ground everything to a halt. But that classic lineup wouldn't last. First, Nick Hippa left, in an acrimonious departure that suggested real problems within the band. Hippa said he didn't want to continue tolerating behavior which at times mistreats, disrespects, and hurts other people. Pretty damning words. After 15 years, Josh Gilbert left, followed by OG drummer Jordan Mencino, who cited ongoing internal issues. Lambesis would say Mencino excommunicated himself from As I Lay Dying, which is a grand way of saying the guys had a falling out. Ryan Neff from Miss May I and Ken Sussy and Nick Pierce of Unearth replaced the outgoing members, and the band got to work on another album. That album, Through Storms Ahead, had a troubled conception, but it was eventually released in 2024. The record received some fairly good reviews, but by now it was clear that life in the band, or maybe just life with Tim Lambesis, was a nightmare. The last long-term member of the band, Phil Scroso, left shortly after the album was released, saying that As I Lay Dying no longer offers a healthy or safe environment for anyone involved. So what the hell was going on? Wasn't Lambesis now a reformed character? Hadn't he put all that scandal behind him? Apparently not. Shortly after his release from prison, Lambesis had married Amanda DeBoer, only to get divorced in 2020. In 2022, he married model Danielle Norris, also known as Danny Ciara, but the pair's relationship was at best difficult and at worst frightening. In November 2024, leaked home security footage showed Norris and Lambesis in a heated argument, culminating in the singer striking himself in the head and chest. Lambesis would accuse Norris of domestic abuse and physical and emotional violence. 2 months later, another video surfaced. This time, the footage apparently showed Lambesis kicking and beating his dog. Norris denied that she leaked the video in response to the accusations made against her, and the grim saga of violence and abuse is still ongoing. As of 2025, As I Lay Dying are still together, or perhaps I should say the band still exists. They can't really be together as it's only one guy. Tim Lambesis is keeping the AILD flag flying, but the specter of scandal still hangs over him. Perhaps having a musical outlet can help Lambesis, providing the therapy he needs to work through his demons. Or maybe the pressure of being in one of metalcore's biggest ever bands is adding fuel to the fire of the torment that is obviously putting himself and others at risk. Whichever it is, I hope that everyone involved in this often sad story can find the peace they need and begin moving forwards with their lives. Thanks for joining me on this one. It's been pretty upsetting and unpleasant at times. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Can we separate art from artist? Should we ignore all the scandal and shame and just focus on those fantastic early AILD albums? Or is that just not possible? Is it time to turn away from As I Lay Dying altogether? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and stay right where you are for another deep dive coming up next.